Christmas Eve, she ran into the snow with her kids until a U.S. Marine and his K-9 opened the door. The temperature outside Harlan County, Kentucky, had dropped to -12 by 10 o'clock on Christmas Eve, and the county road that ran along the ridge above Calvin Briggs's farmhouse was empty in the specific way that rural roads were empty in the mountains in deep winter. Not quiet, wind loud, the sound of a cold that had decided to be thorough about itself. The snow had been coming since 4 in the afternoon and was now 8 inches on the flat and more in the drifts along the fence line. And Calvin was at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and Bear at his feet, and his grandmother Loretta in her chair by the wood stove reading a magazine she had already read, which was how Loretta read magazines she liked. Again, more slowly. Bear lifted his head at 10:17. He did not make a sound. He walked to the front door and sat in front of it, and Calvin looked at him and then at the window and through the glass. In the kitchen light cast across the snow of the front yard, he saw a woman coming up his driveway with a child on each hip, moving as fast as she could move through 8 inches of snow without falling. She was in a sweatshirt, no coat. The children had coats. She had put the coats on the children and run. Bear was already at the door when Calvin stood up, and Loretta Briggs had her hand on the door handle before either of them said anything. Because Loretta Briggs had been opening her door for 60 years when something required opening, and she was not going to stop for any reason she could think of. What Calvin found when Loretta opened the door, and what he found when the man who had put the family in the snow arrived 40 minutes later looking for them, would require everything the house had been and everything Calvin had become, and the specific grace of a Christmas Eve that asked both of them to be ready. This is what this channel does. If you're new here, subscribe before we go any further. Calvin had been a Marine for 12 years and had been home in Harlan County for 18 months and was 36 years old and was in the particular way of men who had come from difficult places and come back to them, still working out the relationship between who he had been and who he was going to be. He had grown up on this ridge, the grandson of Loretta and Frank Briggs, raised by them from age 9 after his mother died of an aneurysm on a Wednesday afternoon, and his father, who was working a strip mine 2 counties over, had not been in a position to come back for reasons that Calvin had understood as a child, without having the words for them, and understood more fully now. Frank had died in 2011, 3 years into Calvin's first deployment, and Calvin had come home for the funeral and gone back, and the house had been Loretta's alone for 11 years, until Calvin returned. He had come back because Loretta was 78, and the house needed work, and because he had a need that the Marine Corps had put back together twice, and that had been put back together twice wrong, and that had finally run out of things the surgeons could do with it, and because Harlan County was the place he knew, the way he knew his own hands, and there was something to be said when you were figuring out who you were without the Corps, for being in a place that knew who you were before the Corps. He had been fixing the house for 18 months, the roof first, then the porch, then the plumbing, then the window in the back bedroom that had been sealed with plastic sheeting since 2018. Loretta Briggs had been born in Harlan County in 1946 and had never left it for longer than a vacation and had no intention of changing this arrangement. She had worked the office of the Harlan County Coal Association for 22 years, answering the phones and managing the paperwork and being the person everyone called when they needed the actual answer to an actual question, which was different from the official answer in which Loretta always had. She had been married to Frank Briggs for 44 years and had buried him in 2011 and had then been alone in the farmhouse for 7 years until Calvin came back, during which time she had managed the house and the garden and the church committee and the County Historical Society and 3 different neighbors' crises, because Loretta Briggs managed things that needed managing and did not require an audience to do it. She was also the kind of woman who had made her home into a place that knew how to receive people, not performatively. She did not have a guest room kept perfect for guests. She had a couch that had held a lot of people over the years, and a chest of quilts, and a pot on the stove that she kept going because people often arrived when they were cold, and a cup of something warm was the first useful thing she could offer. She had been opening her door for 60 years to whoever the night sent, and she had never once made the opening into something that required the person coming in to feel diminished for needing to come in. He had a rhythm with the work, and a rhythm with Bear, and a rhythm with Loretta, who made opinions about everything and delivered them without asking if opinions were wanted, which was one of the things Calvin loved about her And the other thing was that she had never once, in 27 years of raising him, made him feel like the thing she was doing was a burden rather than a life. Bear had been with him for 14 months. He was a large black German shepherd with a barrel chest and a face that was the honest face of an animal who did not perform his intentions in either direction. Not aggressive, not performatively gentle, just present and accessible in the way that Calvin found most of the things he trusted to be. He had been placed through a veteran support program for the hypervigilance and the sleep, and he had delivered on the program's promises, and he had also turned out to have a quality that was not trained but simply his. Children trusted him immediately, without being taught to, the way children trusted things that were genuinely safe. Nora Vance came through the door with Lily on her right hip and Cole on her left, and she was shaking so hard the children were shaking with her. And Loretta took Cole before anyone had been introduced and said, come in, come on in out of that," which was the sentence Loretta used for everything that needed to come out of the cold, whether it was a person or a cat or a pot of chili that had been on the porch, because the kitchen was already warm enough. Nora said, I'm so sorry, I didn't know where else. And Loretta said, no, one apologizes in this house for coming in from the cold. That is a rule. Calvin, get the blankets from the chest. Calvin got the blankets. Bear went to the couch where Loretta had put the children and lay down between them without being told. And Cole put his hand on Bear's back the way small children put their hands on large dogs, with the absolute confidence that the large dog is on their side. And the shaking in Lily's body began, slowly, to ease. Nora Vance had been planning to leave for 6 weeks. She had been building the plan in the specific way that people build plans under surveillance, a little at a time, nothing that could be noticed. A mental accounting of what she would take and where she would go and how she would get there. The problem was the truck keys. Dale kept them. She had thought about this from every angle and had not found the angle that worked. Tonight, there had not been an angle. Tonight, there had been Dale at the point of the evening when the drinking had crossed from frightening into something more specific, and she had put the children's coats on them and taken the thing from the hookshelf by reflex. The Bible, the one her father had left her, USMC stamped in the front cover, James Howell, 1987 to 1991, the one object from her father she had kept and carried for 8 years, and she had run 4 miles across the ridge to the only house with a light on. Calvin asked her carefully whether she was hurt. She said she wasn't. He asked if she had a phone. She said Dale had it. He asked if she had family. She said her mother was in Barberville, 2 hours away, and she didn't have the number memorized. He said they would find the number. He said she was warm and safe and they were going to solve the problems in order, and the first problem was getting the children warm. He looked at Lily. Lily's lips had the faint blue tinge of a child who had been cold for too long. He had enough field medicine to know what this was, and to know that the solution was warmth and time, and dry clothes, and not the emergency room, but that the window for home management was specific and not infinite. Have you ever opened your door on a night like this? Or had someone open their door for you? Tell me in the comments. I think more of us have been on one side of that door than we say, and I think most of us know which side we most needed to be on. Loretta had Lily out of her damp coat and into a dry flannel shirt that reached to her knees, and under 2 quilts, in 8 minutes, which was the speed at which Loretta operated when a child needed care, which was the speed she had always operated. She had a pot of soup on the stove because she had made soup on Christmas Eve for 52 years. And tonight was not going to be different. And she ladled bowls for the children and then for Nora, and then brought a bowl to the living room for Nora, because Nora had gone still in the way people went still after an emergency when the emergency was over. And the body was trying to understand what had happened. She helped Nora out of the wet sweatshirt and into one of Calvin's flannels. The bruising was on both arms, upper arms, the specific pattern of someone grabbed from behind, old enough to have yellowed at the edges, and new enough at the center that the original purple was still there. Loretta looked at this without saying anything, and Nora did not explain it. And Loretta put the flannel over the bruising, and they did not discuss it further at that moment, which was Loretta's understanding of what the moment needed. Calvin was in the kitchen when Loretta came to tell him. He was standing at the window holding Nora's Bible. He had opened the front cover without thinking, the reflex of a man who always opened books to see who they had belonged to, and he had read the name, James Howell, USMC, 1987 to 1991. He had set the Bible on the table and was looking at it when his grandmother came in. She told him about the arms. He looked at the Bible. He thought about what it meant to be the daughter of a Marine who had served the same era as his own father and had also died and left a daughter who ended up, tonight of all nights, in Calvin's grandmother's house with her children and quilts on the couch and a dog between them, keeping them warm. He did not try to make it into more than it was. He just stood with it for a moment, which was what such things required. The headlights came through the kitchen window at 10:53. A truck, moving slowly, the cracked windshield visible in the reflection of the farmhouse's porch light. Calvin had seen that cracked windshield when Nora came up the drive, had registered it in the snow behind her, and now understood what it meant to see it coming toward the house. He said to Loretta, "Take the kids to the back bedroom." Loretta was already moving. He opened the front door before Dale reached the porch. Bear was at his left side, sitting, not growling yet, just present, the specific presence of a large black German shepherd in a doorway, which was its own form of statement. Dale Vance was 34 and had grown up in Harlan County the same as Calvin, and had worked the mines like half the men in the county until the mine closures, and then had not worked and had been not working for 11 months, and the 11 months had done something to him that would probably have done something to most men. And that had done to Dale specifically the thing that sometimes happened when men who had defined themselves by their ability to provide found themselves unable to provide. None of this was the point right now. The point right now was what he had done with it, and what he had done with it was standing in Calvin's kitchen in a flannel shirt that belonged to Calvin with bruises on her arms. Dale said Nora was his wife, and he just wanted to take his family home. He said it in the voice of a man who had said it before, and had found that saying it in that specific tone usually worked. Bear stood up. The growl started low and without variation, and Bear moved from Calvin's side to the doorframe. Not forward, not past Calvin, but beside him in the specific way that said, "This door is a line, and I am part of it." When Dale took one step toward the door, Bear's weight shifted forward onto his front legs, and the growl dropped one register, and Dale stopped. From the kitchen doorway, behind Calvin, Nora said it in the voice of a woman who had been counting specific things for 14 months and was choosing in this moment to state one of them out loud. He took the truck keys on Thanksgiving. The porch was silent except for the wind. Calvin looked at Dale. He said that Nora and the children were staying tonight. He said that the Harlan County Sheriff's Department was going to receive a call in the morning documenting the evening's events, and that the call was going to include a description of visible physical injuries that Calvin had been told about and that his grandmother had seen firsthand, and that constituted a pattern under Kentucky law. That was the kind of thing that mattered in the kind of proceeding that was coming. He said he had a contact at the County Commonwealth's attorney's office whose number he was going to provide to Nora in the morning. He said none of this with heat. Dale was from Harlan County. Calvin was from Harlan County with the same mine closures and the same years of watching the place empty out. And Calvin understood what Dale was carrying without it being his responsibility to carry it for him. And the specific restraint of that understanding was in his voice. He said, "Go home, Dale." Dale looked at Bear. Bear was still in the doorframe, the growl still on Dale's hands. And Dale looked at the dog for a long moment, and then he looked at Calvin, and he looked past Calvin at Nora in the kitchen doorway, and something moved across his face that was not quite regret and was not quite recognition and was something in the category of a man seeing himself from the outside for 1 second and finding the view something he could not hold. He left. Bear watched the truck's headlights until they had gone around the bend of the county road and the sound of the engine had faded into the wind. Then he turned and walked back to the living room and lay down on the couch between the quilts and the children and put his head on Cole's knee. If you were sitting in that farmhouse on Christmas Eve after all of that, what would you say to Nora? I've thought about it. I think the answer might be nothing for a while, just the soup and the fire and the morning. Tell me what you'd say in the comments. The Commonwealth's Attorney's Office contact was a woman named Dana Holbrook who had grown up in Leslie County, one county over, and who had been handling domestic violence cases in eastern Kentucky for 9 years, and who told Calvin on the phone the following morning with a specific, direct competence that 9 years of this work produced, that the pattern of evidence he was describing, combined with the documented departure from the home with children in sub-zero temperatures, constituted an emergency protective order case that she could have filed by the following afternoon, and that she was prepared to do so. Dana also knew a woman named Pastor Ruth Combs, who ran the Harlan County Family Stability Network out of the back of her church on Central Street, who had 3 transitional housing units available. Who knew Nora's mother in Barberville by name, and who arrived at Calvin's farmhouse on Christmas morning with a covered dish and a folder of resources and the specific, unhurried competence of a woman who had been doing this work for 20 years and who treated each person she helped with the same attention she would have given her own family, because that was the standard she had decided on and had never lowered. Nora's mother came from Barberville on the 26th. She was 54 and had driven in the snow, and when she saw her daughter and her grandchildren in Calvin's grandmother's kitchen, she said nothing for a full minute. And then she sat down and held them all. And nobody said anything for a while because nothing needed to be said. Nora and the children moved to the transitional housing on the 28th. The protective order was filed and served. Dale had a hearing date in January. The proceeding that followed was not simple and was not fast. These things never were. But Dana Holbrook was competent and methodical, and she had 9 years and she had seen cases with less and had prevailed. On Christmas morning, before any of this had been arranged, but after the soup had been finished and the children had slept, and the county road outside was quiet under a fresh foot of snow, Calvin sat at the kitchen table with coffee and bear at his feet, and Loretta making biscuits at the counter. Loretta made biscuits on Christmas morning and had since 1971. First for her own children, and then for Calvin, and then for whoever was in the house, and this was not an accommodation she had made for the occasion. It was simply what Christmas morning was in this kitchen. In this house, on this ridge, Nora was at the table with her hands around a cup of coffee that Calvin had poured before she asked for it. Lily and Cole were on the couch, still in the quilts, Bear between them, his tail the only moving thing in the room as it moved once every time one of the children shifted. The nativity set on the mantel had been there since 1973, a ceramic one that Loretta's mother had painted and given her the first Christmas after her wedding. Every figure slightly imperfect in the way of handmade things, which was what Loretta loved about it. The stable's small light was on because Loretta turned it on every Christmas Eve when she set it up and left it on until New Year's Day, and it cast the specific warm light that it had cast for 50 years. And the room had the quality of a room that had held many things and had learned how to hold them well. Nora said, after a while looking at the window, "I didn't know where else to go." "That's exactly where you were supposed to come." She said it in the matter-of-fact tone she used for things that were simply true and required no elaboration. She turned around and looked at Nora and said, "My grandson's father served the same years as yours." She nodded at the Bible on the table, where Calvin had left it. James Howell, USMC. Same era as Frank Jr. She looked back at the biscuits. "I don't know what that means, exactly. I just think it means you're not here by accident." Calvin looked at the Bible. He looked at Bear, who had not moved from between the children. He thought that Loretta was probably right, and that he was going to need some time to figure out what she was right about, and that in the meantime the biscuits were almost done, and the children were going to wake up soon, and that this Christmas morning was going to be what it was going to be. Loretta had opened the door for 60 years. She didn't know, on this particular Christmas Eve, that she was opening it for the family that needed it most. Or maybe she did. Maybe that was what 60 years of opening the door had built. The specific knowledge of when the door needed to open, before anyone knocked. This story is for every person who opened their door when the night was cold and someone was running toward the light, and for every woman who ran toward the light with her children and found that someone had left it on. Is there a Loretta in your life? Someone who has been opening the door for as long as you can remember. For whoever needed to come in. Tell me about them in the comments. I read every one. This section deserves their names. Every story on this channel is about choosing not to look away. Sometimes it's about the light you leave on when you don't know who's coming toward it. Subscribe if that means something to you. There are more stories to tell. Which moment in this story stayed with you? I'll see you in the comments.